The K Jazz Show, Sundays on Kofifi FM 97.2.
This Sunday, the K-Jazz Show returns with a front row flair and a rhythm-rich coverage of the Joy of Jazz Festival. Now, when it comes to, world-class groove, finesse on the kit, and a keen ear behind the studio desk, our next guest wears many hats, all stylishly tilted towards excellence. Joining us for the very first time here on Kofifi FM 97.2 is a man who keeps time like it is a fine wine. Matured, bold, and full of notes. He's not just a drummer, he's a sculptor, a rhythmic sculptor at that, a sonic craftsman, and a creative force who's been shaping the sound of South African jazz for over a decade. Whether he's leading his acclaimed Peter Auret Trio, laying down tracks for legends in his Sumo Sound Recording studio, or simply collaborating with jazz giants, both locally and globally, one thing's for sure. When Peter Auret is involved, the music doesn't play. It speaks. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, jazz cats and rhythm seekers, giving him a Kofifi FM welcome. Peter Auret. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and thank you for the listeners that are tuning in. I'm very excited. It's my debut on your station.
Absolutely, and it is a pleasure to have you. Peter, your career, spans performance, production, innovation. But let's start with the heartbeat itself. When did jazz first grab you by the collar, and say, "Excuse me, sir, you're mine"?
I think when I was in my sort of early 20s or late teens, at least, I started playing drums, and as any respectable white boy from the suburbs, I listened to a lot of rock and roll, and a lot of my friends had left school and had started studying jazz music at the then Technikon Pretoria. Now it's called Tshwane University of Technology, and they sort of got me into it. They came back from school and would say, we don't listen to rock anymore. We're checking out jazz, and I got introduced to names like Miles Davis and Coltrane, and the legends, of course. And I just out of curiosity, I started checking it out, and to be honest, I wasn't immediately taken by it. I had to sort of discover that journey through sort of rock fusion acts like Weather Report and Stanley Clarke, the early Stanley Clarke stuff, and even some smooth jazz like Foreplay. That sort of stuff was my sort of introduction to it. And then at some point, I just fell in love with swing music. Actually, I don't know how it happened. It just happened one day,
And I want to talk about the Peter Auret Trio, which has been around since 2010, a solid 15-year groove. How has the trio sound evolved, I guess, with this background over the years? And what keeps the chemistry, between the three of you, I guess, David Cousins and Benjamin Jefter?
Well, originally when my trio started, I started with a friend of mine, a double bass player that's since immigrated, James Sunny. He's in the UK now, and the pianist was Roland Moses. I just love, I've always been attracted to the trio sound. When I got into to jazz, the likes of Keith Jarrett and Brad Mehldau. That is sort of the thing that first attracted me. And I think it's because of the interplay and the freedom that it has. You're not just, as a drummer in a jazz trio, you're not just a timekeeper or a groove player. You're a voice, and there's a conversation with a trio that is not necessarily present in a quartet. Although there is conversation, but the roles are slightly more defined. Within a trio, there's a lot of interplay and conversation. So, I got into that. These artists that I mentioned, and I had been playing with Roland Moses. We played in a jazz fusion band, and I started with him and my friend James, and we recorded an album called Turn the Tide, and since then we played the Joy of Jazz, I think in 2013 with that trio, and obviously I'm a freelance musician, so I also work for other people, and at some point there's always this management, like money, art versus the dollar. Like, am I gonna what am I doing this season? Am I doing other people's gigs, or I'm going to focus on my own music? And so sometimes, with original projects, and I see that with a lot of fantastic jazz artists that we have, sometimes you see them sort of taking a break, and you're like, what are they doing? And I think I did a little bit of that. I kept the trio alive, and then around I think 2014, with the Orbit being around, I sort of resurrected the band a bit, and at some point, David Cousins came onto my radar, and he filled in for a gig for Roland, and then him and I started writing some music together, and then eventually the bass player left, and I met Chikechi on other people's jazz gigs, and the three of us, David, Amechi, and I became sort of regular features, sometimes in other people's bands, and we just connected, and we started sharing ideas, and we've actually done so much together, backing people and just playing music and getting together and wanting to play together.
What a tale, what a story, and still on the trio, it marries American, South African. I love that you mentioned Brad Mehldau, South African and European jazz traditions. Now, the question here is it a conscious balancing act or more like a potjie, where the flavors just mingle organically?
I think it's a bit of both. That's a great analogy to just say a potjie, because it's it's a very South African thing, but I think even though musicians have common sounds that they like often, and but it is even I love Mehldau, and let's say David Cousins loves Brad Mehldau. That's actually our connection. But I also there's music that I like that I know that is not sort of his bag, and he's got music that he likes that's not really my bag, and I think we inject those little influences, and then also our South African music influences, which are also very wide. There's certain things that I love and cherish, and know it's very special to me. And then at the same time, he's got his South African sounds that he loves, and the same with Benjamin. He's from the Cape. There's certain guys that he idolized growing up, and that has informed his music. His musical taste. So the potjie thing, it is a little bit of a blend, but then sometimes there is a thing about making, also trying to be unique and not copying. I mean, we copy our heroes. We all do that. But we also want to. We also sometimes want to consciously bring that South African thing to have a uniqueness, to have a sound, and it's around us. You can't deny that it's there.
Let's talk about, your latest project, Hope Dies Last, which was released in 2024. This title alone, is powerful. Let's talk about the inspiration behind this work and what do you hope the listeners take away from listening to this project?
Well, it's sort of like there's a sort of two angles in which I came up with this title. Firstly, when we started that project, specifically those tunes and that material during the COVID pandemic. So where hopelessness was at an all-time high, and the feeling of loss and not being able to work. So it was a tune. There's actually the title tune, Hope Dies Last, I had written it. It didn't have a name. I think it was called Track 4 for quite a long time. But it is a sort of a somber type of march. It sort of reminds me of the feeling was like sort of like a funeral procession type of thing. That's sort of the feeling of the music. And then that title, someone mentioned that one day in a joke, unrelated to the music, and I sort of it stuck with me. And then when the artwork for my disc was done by a fantastic local a friend and a fan that comes to shows, and when I saw it, it reminded me a little bit of the COVID pandemic. And it's everything just sort of fell into place. It wasn't like this. Oh, I'm trying to make this, this emotive piece. I mean, the piece is emotive, but it wasn't really to talk about COVID or whatever. But it, all these messages and the narrative of the time sort of came together, and that's sort of how the title has unfolded. If you see the artwork, it'll sort of make sense. It's quite dark.
Yeah, of course. In case you've just joined us, we're speaking to Peter Auret this week, and he is our distinguished musician, drummer, and music producer, widely recognized as the leader of the Peter Auret Trio. And he joins us today ahead of his Joy of Jazz 2025 performance, of course. And you certainly have to be there for that one. Now, Peter, you've graced, speaking of performance, you've graced the stages of legendary venues like you mentioned earlier, the Orbit, and international festivals like UNISA and Makufe and many others. What is it about, live music performance that still excites you after all these years?
I often have to ask myself that question because it's quite a silly career to get into. And, in terms of if you want to have a fantastic life with wealth, it's not necessarily the best career. But in terms of experiences, it is the best career. And I think I asked myself this question this week. I play with Marcus Wyatt. He's got this jam session in Melville. It's been going for many years now. And it's just the joy of playing, and to almost to be childlike in terms of experiencing music where it's not about money, and it's not about income, and it's a moment of expression, and where you can try things, and there's just real joy in making music. All the other things for me are peripheral. Obviously, I've got kids, I've got a family. There are things that I do to make money, but the joy of playing is really what it's about, and expressing and living a life. It's an extraordinary life to perform music. It is. It's truly an extraordinary life. It doesn't always feel like that when you're in it. When you're struggling. Gigs, you look at your calendar and you're like, oh God, I've got no gigs, or whatever for the next month. But it is, the people that you meet and bringing joy, and sometimes it's just that one person coming to you and saying, I love this song, and they actually know the title of the song, and they say, this is my favorite, and it touches me, and they're so happy to hear it in a live performance situation. It's a special moment, and it's not about ego or anything at that point. It's just about, wow, you did something that touched someone's life.
The family at the Standard Bank Joy of Jazz this year are thrilled to have you back. Let's talk to our audiences and, of course, give them a teaser in terms of, what they can expect from your set this time around.
So for this year, obviously, I want to showcase a lot of material from my album, material that I haven't, that has not really seen stages, and some of the pieces I have actually played, but they were sort of in development at the time. We were trying them out, and they have morphed. And so for this year's performance, I'm hoping to bring with this trio. I'm really hoping to bring that intensity of real piano trio playing. That is the main thing. The material is not as important as the performance for me at this point. So, but I will be playing predominantly music from this new album, and then David Cousins, the pianist, has written some incredible tunes in the last year that we've performed. When Amechi was still around, and I think it's beautiful stuff, and it shows growth in the group, as performers and as a unit. So I'm hoping to play some of that music. But mainly, I think the idea is just to bring, the music must be a vehicle for us to do something that is going to be exciting, not in a showbiz Vegas type of way, but in a intensity and a expressive sort of manner where people can feel that interplay and that love for playing and the conversation, where the conversation is actually what it's about.
You've collaborated and you maybe shared stages with everyone from Sibongile Khumalo, Mam Sibongile Khumalo, to Shabaka Hutchings. Do you ever, have like a pinch me moment where you just or a gig or studio session that feels completely surreal?
Well, in terms of those, specifically those two names, I actually have never worked with them on stage, but I have recorded. I've recorded for Shabaka twice, and I did Sibongile's last album was done here at my studio. And of course, I mean, it's the first time I got to play with Andile Yanana as in a group. He phoned me, and I was like, "This is a guy that I've seen play, and I respect so much." And I played in a group with him for about 2 or 3 years, and I loved it. And when I was a kid, when I was getting into jazz, I listened to Paul Hamner, and I got to play with him a few times, and I got to play with McCoy, and it's. Sometimes you're like, wow, I've made it. You know what I mean? It's like, there is that pinch me. You come home and you're super proud, and, you played in a little dingy club somewhere, but it's like, it is definitely a highlight. And also to have the people that have come through my door as a, in a music production sense, I have really been blessed. And sometimes I have to remind myself, sometimes I reflect on that. And I think, it's incredible that in some small way I've also contributed to this songbook of and this tradition of South African music in a very tiny way. I'm not saying I composed their music or anything. They would have made those records with or without me, but I was there and I saw little bits of history. Which for me is. It's humbling and it's also it's a thing that sort of sometimes gets me through a rough patch. When the work is there, you're like, well, I've got this. I've done this. So, it's cool.
Yes. Kofifi FM, we are in conversation with Peter Auret as our musical guest this Sunday from our Studio 2 in Cresta. And he's one of the incredible musicians at the Joy of Jazz Festival that is happening this September for a full 3 days. That is from the 26th to the 28th of September at the Sandton Convention Center right here in the city. And all you need to do to book yourself a seat, is to head to their website, joyofjazz.co.za. And of course, keep listening to the K-Jazz Show to keep up to date with some of the happenings as we count down to Johannesburg's favorite festival. And speaking of studio, Peter, as a summer award-winning, engineer and head of Sumo Sound, how does your work behind the mixing desk influence your approach to live music playing, or vice versa?
It's also interesting that you should ask that, because it's something that I thought about in the last week, where I work with a few artists where sometimes I'm a drummer. I play the drums, and that is a role in itself, timekeeping and rhythm. But often I'm asked to contribute a suggestion, and I often think that a lot of drummers are look at the composition or the production, or from a production point of view, because we don't have. Our instrument doesn't have. We can't play chords. We can't play melodies. We can provide rhythm, and sometimes our job is complex, and sometimes it's not complex. But we do get to have a sort of more holistic view of the sound of the group, and I think drummers are great producers generally. I think because of their position. They're not. They provide support. Sometimes they are a feature, but they do have to draw inspiration from what they're hearing and create, and also add to it. It's not just keeping a beat. So sometimes there's something that you can't do, and then you would suggest, well, maybe if the bass does this, or maybe the piano should be doing less of that, or whatever. So I think there is a direct correlation between those two things. Being a drummer, like I said, there's a lot of drummers that are musical directors and producers, and definitely for me, I think a little bit about that when I go play, because sometimes it's improvised music and you have to make something, and it's almost like okay, you don't have the facility of a computer where you can get a sample or dial up a sound or whatever, but you are sort of doing that in the capacity of the instrument, and the limitations of the instrument.
Yeah.
Like, well, maybe you should be playing. It's more like a brush thing. It's more 16th notes. There's more subdivision in the groove, because that's really going to make this thing cook a little bit. Or so there is production for me in playing, and I do think like that. I do think like from a production point of view often when I play.
You also lead,
the
the Sculptor Quintet, blending classic with jazz. My question here is, do you see genre boundaries as walls to climb, or canvases maybe, that you'd like to paint across?
Yeah, with something like the Sculptor Quintet, what I love about that, and it's a little indulgence of mine, because it's what I like about it. It's not really. I'm not really trying to reinvent the wheel with that.
Yeah.
I just like the idea of forcing classical musicians into the very difficult position of improvisation, and also to play music that is not traditional from their world. It's not. I mean, with that quintet, we do play some of the great composers, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. We play some of those things, but with a very different slant. So we try and put like a more sort of contemporary or jazz type rhythm section to it, and sometimes it's completely the opposite. It's like it's a full on jazz composition, and they're going to play it on violins, and it's for me, it's like I said, it's my dirty little secret and my sort of fun thing that I do. It's also great for me because I get to arrange that music. So it's a massive learning curve, and it's a little hobby that's turned into something that is quite cool now.
my parting shot, I guess, as someone whose artistry spans drums, direction, and decades. And we do have some, up and coming, musicians who always tune into the show. So my thing would be, what advice would you give to these young musicians as they carve this space into this, I guess, ever evolving scene?
Well, I think the main thing that has kept me going, and a theme that is recurring in my life, I often have to remind myself why I decided to do this in the first place. As I'm sort of heading to my 50s now, and I have had many ups and downs, like in any career, and for any human being, where you doubt yourself and you doubt your decisions. But the thing that I always come back to, and that I have to often remind myself, is the reason why I started, and the first gig, and the first time I played the drums, and that feeling. And I'm constantly trying to evoke that feeling, or like try and bring that feeling back, because that's the thing that keeps me going. And I think any success that I've had in my life has been because of that. It's not been because I've wanted to be famous, and not that I'm famous, but it's never been because of that. It's never been because of riches. It's always been, there's obviously those moments where you're like, oh, that's a good paying gig. But the main thing for me is like, do I love it? Do I feel the same about it? And am I excited? When I pack my drums in the car, I want to be excited. And sometimes it takes a little bit of, just going back and thinking, why am I doing this? So that's a reason to play.
Yeah. And of course, you heard it here, Kofifi FM. His name is Peter Auret. And thank you so much, Peter, for joining us this Sunday. And we look forward to seeing you on the stages at the upcoming Joy of Jazz Festival.
I'm very much looking forward to that. And hopefully we can, hopefully we'll see you at the show, and we can have a chat and a drink afterwards, if it all went well.
Absolutely. Musician, drummer, and music producer. His name is Peter Auret. And for our weekly Our Africa feature, he was on the K-Jazz Show.